And we'll move on now to item number 6, which is Mr. Mark Puckett, presentation, financing, and purchasing of Liberty Utilities. That's this, right?
Yeah, those are yours.
Okay.
I've got mine.
Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council. If you'd give me just 1 second here to cue it up. Mr. Mayor, members of council, good evening again. And while the screen is warming up, I just wanted to mention that there are 3 documents that I've provided for council and for the members of the public to help illustrate the presentation so that they can follow along. And those 3 documents are a copy of the PowerPoint presentation, a copy of a document called Preliminary Financial Analysis, and this document there's a representative excerpt of this document, which is the bottom section of the document, which appears in one of the slides. But this document shows the sources of funds that would be used to finance the acquisition and the information related to the bond sizing analysis that was performed to arrive at the estimated debt service requirements for bonds that would need to be issued at different valuations. And then the third document is a spreadsheet that looks like this, and this document is titled CPUC Annual Report Schedule B, Income Account for the Year. And basically what that relates to is the income statement or income account, as it's referred to, in the one financial report that Liberty Utilities issues each year to the CPUC. It's called their annual report. It's due March 31st of this year. The report that's provided is through 2015. It has years 2002 through 2015 of that particular page in the annual report. However, the 2016 report has not yet been filed. It appears that each year Liberties has asked for an extension to the filing deadline of March 31st, and as of today at 6 p.m. they had not yet filed the 2016 report. So with that, I'd like to briefly go through the slides and then answer any questions that council may have. And I want to also point out that, as is illustrated within the title, the purpose of this presentation is to demonstrate that not only are there resources available within the existing rate to acquire the water company, but the resources available within the existing rates or existing resources of Liberty Utilities are more than sufficient to meet the debt service requirements at different points, and in fact appear that they will provide resources that would fund not only the acquisition but potentially additional capital improvements or reduction in rates. So just real quickly, I wanted to provide a brief history of the ownership of Apple Valley Ranchos. Apple Valley Ranchos was formed in approximately 1945, and then for some period of time, and I don't know the exact period, it was owned by the Wheeler family through the Park Water Company. And the Park Water Company included 3 water systems, all approximately equal in size based on the number of customers served, as about 20,000 each system. And those 3 systems included Park Water Company that serves 7 communities along the I-10 corridor. in LA County, which is Paramount, Norwalk, Compton, those communities along that corridor. Mountain Water Company, which is in Missoula, Montana, and the Apple Valley Ranchos system here in Apple Valley. As has been reported many times, the City of Missoula is in the process of finalizing the acquisition through eminent domain of the Mountain Water Company, and that system was valued by the courts at $88.7 million. In 2011, the Park Water Company was sold to the Carlyle Group. That's a little less than 6 years ago. Sold to the Carlyle Group for $111 million for all three water systems. The Carlyle Group is a multinational global asset management firm with over $180 billion in assets based in Washington, D.C., with investors all over the world. And the Carlyle Group placed the Park Water Company in their infrastructure and investment fund. In a little over about 16 months ago now, the Carlyle Group sold Park Water Company to Algonquin Power and Utilities for the reported sum of $257 million. And that $257 million, it's unclear if that's the net asset value or if that's the value of the assets that were acquired. It's been reported that $257 million was the value of the assets, and then that there was a assumed debt of about $70 million. Typically, when a system or any business is sold, it's purchased at the net asset value. So effectively, if the net asset value is a $257 million in assets less the $70 million, the net asset value would be approximately $180 million. Algonquin Power and Utilities is a company that was formed in 1997 as an income trust, and it remained an income trust until incorporation in 2009, when the Canadian tax laws changed, eliminating the favorable tax treatment for income trusts. At that time, then, and since the purchase of a Park Water Company in 2015, Apple Valley Ranchos, or now Liberty Utilities Apple Valley, operates as a wholly owned subsidiary of Algonquin Power and Utilities and is operated by their American subsidiary, Liberty Utilities. Again, Algonquin is a Toronto, Ontario-based, Ontario, Canada-based multinational corporation, and owned and operated, again, by their American subsidiary, Liberty Utilities. In this slide, I provided a map of Liberty's service area, and I wanted to include this map for a very specific reason. There's been a number of comments that are made in terms of if the acquisition or the result of any acquisition bonds that would be issued would need to be financed through an increase in property tax revenues. And that's simply not true. The acquisition bonds that would be issued would be revenue bonds, and they would be financed solely from resources generated from the operation of the water system. So only those customers that reside within the service area of Apple Valley Ranchos or Liberty Apple Valley would be those customers that would that the resources from the operation of that water system would be used to pay the acquisition bonds. So there would be no tax measure, no property tax measure that has at any point been considered by the town for financing of the system. And I just want to demonstrate through this slide that the resources that would be used to pay the revenue bonds would come specifically from the existing service area, not from the Golden State service area, not from the community service associations that are in Apple Valley, but strictly from the customers within the service area of Apple Valley Ranchos. That system, that Apple Valley water system, includes approximately 20,000 connections. As of their 2015 report, the average number of connections throughout 2015 was 19,745. The water system serves approximately 65,000 people within that area, covering a service area of about 50 square miles. Its facilities includes 465 miles of water mains, 24 wells, some emergency generators, storage tanks, booster stations, and pressure zones. When the town initiated the eminent domain action, the town was required to initiate an appraisal for the purposes of determining a value for making an offer of just compensation. And in order to perform that appraisal, the town engaged a appraiser who specializes in public utility appraisals. That appraiser reviewed the financial data and toured the Apple Valley water system. The Apple Valley Rancho's engineer provided that tour and guided the tour of the Apple Valley Rancho system. The appraiser used and applied fair market value principles, and what that means is that that's the highest price that a fully informed buyer and seller would agree under no pressure to buy or sell the water company. And that appraisal process was conducted in accordance with California's eminent domain laws, and the eminent domain laws require that the Apple Valley water system be appraised as a water system. The appraiser used several valuation approaches and methods in determining the value of Apple Valley Ranchos, and those included an income approach, a cost or asset approach, and a market approach. And after the performance of that appraisal, the appraiser determined a conclusion of a value of the initial appraisal under the asset or cost approach, which effectively is the when the appraisal was performed using the 2013 rate base for Liberty Utilities of $47.2 million. The market approach was deemed not applicable because there were no comparable sales available to the appraiser to determine the market approach. The income approach was deemed the most reliable valuation, and that income approach uses what's termed an enterprise discounted cash flow valuation, and what that means is that's the evaluation of the cash derived from the operation and future operation of the water system. And using that income approach, the appraiser determined a value of $50.6 million. And that was the resulting conclusion of value for the enterprise discounted cash flow of $50.6 million. And the appraiser determined that a marketability discount should be applied of 10%, which is the $5.06 million, which resulted in the net conclusion of value he arrived at that time of $45.54 million. That figure was later revised to $50.3 million based upon Liberty Utilities' newly issued 2014 annual report, which again came out in April of 2014. At that time, Liberty's rate base in that, in the 2015 report, the most recent information available, their current rate base information is $58.493 million. So in determining the sources of funding, what we use to determine that information is Liberty Utilities' financial information that they have reported out to the CPUC, which is their annual report, their 2015 annual report. Again, their 2016 report should be reported out this week, sometime most likely on Friday But this information, again, is information that Liberty Utilities has reported to the CPUC. It's available on Liberty Utilities' website and also available at the CPUC website, which is cpuc.ca.gov. And looking at the revenue requirements of the town versus Liberty Utilities, there are certain standard components that would be consistent to the operations of the water utility either by the town or by the water company. And those include the water supply cost or lease on rights or imported water costs, commodity costs, fuel or energy costs, administrative and overhead costs, capital repair and maintenance costs. The differences that the town would not pay include the authorized rate of return of 9.7%, and that's Liberty Utilities' profit. And based on the 2015 annual report, that number is $4,284,474. The taxes that are paid by Liberty Utilities of almost $4 million, the town does not pay taxes because we're a tax-exempt public entity, and those resources would also be available on day one to finance debt service, capital improvements, and rate reductions. Liberty Utilities also pays itself a profit from the subsidiaries to the parent company in Park Water Company, and those intercompany service agreements are approximately 30% of the operating costs, and they include plus a percentage. That percentage is not reported out in their annual report, but are estimated at around $2 million. In the Mountain Water case, though, it was roughly about $1.5 million for their intercompany service agreements. Corporate office in Commerce, the town would not need to own or operate a corporate office in Commerce or pay executive compensation for those top executives that work in that corporate office or top executives of Liberty Utilities Apple Valley. And those costs are estimated at about $2 million. Again, those costs I have included, which in the preliminary financial analysis on the top of this document. So they total out to $11,924,919, and I also reference the source of each of those documents or those numbers. The taxes, it's on page 15, line 10 of their 2015 annual report. Less the tax revenues that are paid to the town of roughly $350,000. The profit, which is on page 15, line 39 of Liberty Utilities annual report. The intercompany service agreements, which are referenced on page 33, Schedule A29. And then the corporate office cost of approximately $2 million, which is their estimated executive salary costs and the cost for operation of that office. So those all total out to available resources that would be immediately available to the town of just under $12 million a year, $11.9 million. And again, those are all resources that are available within the existing water rates that customers are now paying. And I had prepared and provided this spreadsheet to demonstrate that fact, that in fact these resources have been available within the existing water rates for many years. So the amount available to put some estimation for error, I guess if you will, in the numbers, we created a broader band from $11.9 million to a low of $10 million to a high of $14 million. So that creates a range of possible values in terms of the resources that would be immediately available to the town to use for the acquisition costs within the existing rate. And again, this analysis is based on the numbers available within Liberty Utilities' 2015 annual report. Since 2015, There have been rate increases in 2016 and rate increases in 2017. And those resources from those rate increases in 2016 and 2017 are not included in this analysis. So the numbers are even larger than those that are presented to you tonight. So in looking at the system financing requirements, we would have to look at the acquisition price, the acquisition cost, which is legal, engineering, and the financial. Would have to include a working capital reserve. There had been some mention that the town would need a working capital reserve. That's been considered in the debt service schedules that have been provided to you. It's a working capital reserve of approximately 90 days. A capital reserve of $3 million, which does not include the capital costs that are included within the existing operations of Liberty Utilities, would then be available to the town for that same purpose upon acquisition, which are at a minimum $4 million a year. Capital expenses, again, based on an engineering assessment. We would have to do an engineering assessment of the system. It's known that much of Liberty's system is over 60 years old, and we would have to examine the condition of that system to determine if there's any immediate upgrades necessary to that system. It would also include a bond reserve fund equal to 1 year's debt service. Capitalized interest, possibly during the first year of interest on bonds. That's based on the timing of acquisition and the timing of the town able to gain control of the system upon successful completion of the acquisition process, and the cost of issuance. So in looking at some of the range of values, the expected cost of the acquisition bonds that would need to be issued, we have to look to the information that's available to us. And what is available to us is the initial appraised value that the town had performed, and the determination of the conclusion of value in that initial appraised value was $50.3 million. Liberty Apple Valley's rate base, again in that 2015 annual report, is $58,493,000. Liberty Apple Valley is asserting that the system is worth much more, but the system was acquired by Liberty Apple Valley less than 16 months ago for $257 million. If you take that asset value and simply divide it by 3, and we assume that to be correct, that would result in an asset value for each of the 3 systems of approximately $85.7 million. And then Mountain Water, which just a few short months ago won the eminent domain, or Missoula, Montana, which won the eminent domain case to purchase Mountain Water, the courts valued Mountain Water's system at $88.7 million, and that was about 6 months ago. So we have a range of values of $50 to $88.7 million based upon the known information that we have today. So in looking again at the financing of the acquisition and the sources of the funding, and this is the selected data I was referring to, the amount that would be available upon acquisition is $11,924,919 approximately in that area. That is the number that ties out again to the preliminary financial analysis provided in the separate handout. And the bottom of that page is the estimated debt service payments at various bond sizings. And this is significant because it assumes 3 scenarios. And the 3 scenarios each follow these basic bond sizing assumptions. And those are that each would be a 30-year debt service schedule for tax-exempt revenue bonds, assuming approximately equal debt service payments, no capitalized interest, an A bond rating, which is the town's natural bond rating now, a bond reserve equaling the highest annual debt service payment, no bond insurance, which could be purchased, which would lower our cost of issuance, and includes the actual cost of issuance. So the first column is assuming that the town would be able to get a state revolving fund loan as VVWRA did for the entire amount of the acquisition costs. And that assumes that that would be at 2%, which is the interest rate that VVWRA is paying on the bonds issued for their sub-regional water treatment facilities. And those debt service at $50 million range from $2.2 million per year up to $150 million, which would be $6.8 million per year. At the current market rates, and I want to, in terms of determining what those current market rates are, I contacted Barclays Capital. Barclays Capital is one of the largest, if not the largest, underwriter in the entire United States. And Barclays Capital performed bond sizing analysis for each one of these scenarios and the estimated current market rate, or actually for all three columns. And I have statements here, which is each of these bond size analyses are 4 pages long for each box on this table. And each box, and I'm going to look at the one that corresponds with the estimated current market rate, and we'll just pick in that column the value of $120 million. And I have made these available to Tom, or to Matt Cabe, who also has a full copy of all of the bond sizing documents. But at the current rate, the 4 documents that are provided are a sources and uses statement, a bond pricing page, a bond summary statistics, which shows the true interest costs and shows the all-in true interest costs, average coupon rates, and then the bond debt service. So each box has all 4 of these pages showing again, the sources and uses of funds, bond pricing, bond summary statistics, and bonded debt service. But at $120 million, which is right in the middle of the current market rate, the estimated current market rate at that level, the estimated debt service payments at that level of $120 million is $7,781,000. $7,781,000. Again, going back to the prior page, showing in our preliminary financial analysis the funds that would be immediately available, we know that at a minimum there would be about $10 million available. At $7,781,000, that would provide over $2 million within the existing rate. It would provide an additional $2 million over the cost of the debt service to either reduce rates or pay additional capital improvements. And I want to point out that at $150 million, the annual debt service requirements at the current market rates would be $9.7 million, again, below the resources that are available today within the existing rate. What that means, we say within the existing rate, just to be really clear, is that upon acquisition, the town would not only not have to raise rates to acquire the water system, but would have sufficient funds to pay the debt service and funds left over to reduce rates or pay for additional capital improvements upon acquisition on day one. The expected value, however, based upon the information or that we know is available, based on Missoula's acquisition process and the assignment of value for that system of $88.7 million, we expect that the system will be acquired somewhere around $100 million. At $100 million based on the current rates, that's $6.484, $6.5 million, which would leave somewhere between $3.5 and $7 million available to reduce rates immediately or pay for additional capital improvements. And $3.5 million, based again on their annual report, Their annual report, there's $23.2 million in revenue. The $10 million that's immediately available today amounts to 43.1% of the revenue that they receive. So that's 43.1% of the revenue, of the resources they're now receiving, is above the cost of water. The town would only charge the customers the cost of water plus the cost of debt service. If the town acquired the system at $100 million, that would amount to $6.5 million in debt service annually, that would leave at a minimum of $10 million, $3.5 million to immediately reduce rates. And that amounts to, based on their average customer base of 19,754, $178 per person annually that rates could be reduced by. And that $178 per person amounts to a reduction of 15%. 15% on day one that the town could reduce rates above the cost of acquisition. 15%. That's a pretty significant number. And again, that's paying for the acquisition within the existing rate, within the existing resources, and then providing resources, additional resources that would be available either to fund additional capital improvements if that were deemed necessary because of the condition of the system, or reduce rates at, and again, that rate reduction could be, 10, 15%. It's kind of shocking when you actually look at the numbers in terms of what the resources are that are available today within the existing rate. So even at a more conservative rate, and again, the current market rate, I need to reference what that current rates are. The true interest cost in the current rate is, depending on the schedule, it's between 4.04% and 4.4% today. And even using a conservative estimate, again, at that $100 million, that would only, a conservative estimate of an interest rate at 4.75%, the annual debt service requirements at 4.75% only at $100 million only increased to $6.9 million. At $120 million, it's $8.2 million. At $150 million, it's $10 million. Again, even at $150 million, the acquisition at 4.75%, which is a very conservative rate based on current market conditions, the financing can be, the acquisition bonds can be financed within the current rate. And that's extremely important to the residents, to the customers of Apple Valley Ranchos. There is no need for any rate increase. And I don't believe anyone's ever suggested that. I've never suggested that there'd be any rate ever approaching 12%. And I've been in the public sector for 31 years, and I'm not aware of any municipality that's ever issued bonds at 12%. That's just a ridiculous number. It's unusual for rates to get, for municipal bonds, for tax-exempt municipal bonds, to get above 6%. Extremely unusual. And again, even at a conservative rate where we can issue bonds today, it would be, at a high of 4.4%, but it'd be somewhere between 4 and 4.4%. And to illustrate that point, I provided some recently issued municipal bonds. As you can see, based on the coupon values, this is the City of Fairfield, California, which just issued water revenue refunding bonds, $40 million in bonds. You can see the range of interest rates range from a low of 3% to a high of 5%. And the structure of the bonds usually are, the first 10 years are what are referred to as serial bonds, and then years 11 through 30 are term bonds. So you see different valuations for each of those maturity dates along that schedule. But again, that ranges from 3% to 5% for the final maturity. For the Brush Creek Regional Facility, The coupons on each of those serial and term bonds vary from 2% to 5%. And then on Town of Oak Island, North Carolina, which issued system revenue refunding bonds of $32 million, the rates range again from 3% to 5%. And then to further underscore that issue, I provided a quote here, and this is a quote from Peter Buffa, who's a director of the public finance section of Barclay Capital. And he says, our desk thinks that a reasonable estimated rate for an A-rated 30-year muni bond issued today is 4%. The analyst came up with this graph that shows both absolute levels and credit spreads over the last 8 years, which makes it obvious that any claims that the town is going to be looking at rates of 10 to 12% in a few months from now is very unrealistic. And as you can see, the range of values there, and this is municipal market data, that's MMD, municipal market data, showing the range of values. You can see that the spread is roughly from about 5.5% down to about 2.5% over that a 9-year period. So, again, the line on the bottom, the orange line, shows the spread in basis points, which is the scale on the right side, and it's roughly between A-rated and AAA rated. It's a spread of roughly about 60 basis points, or 0.6%. So again, the takeaways that I want to underscore are that the system can be acquired within the existing rates, with no property tax increase, no increase in water rates, and it can be acquired at a level of which would, at $100 million, would result in annual debt service payments of $6.5 million at 4 to 4.4% interest rates, and leave available somewhere between 3.5 and 7.5 or $7 million within the existing rates to either lower rates or pay for additional capital improvements. $3.5 million amounts to $178 per ratepayer within the Rancho's service area, or 15% rate reduction that could potentially be that their bills could be reduced by in year one or in day one upon acquisition. And that concludes my comments, and I'm available to answer any questions that council may have.
All right, thank you, Mark. Very in-depth, huh?
I have questions.
Oh, well, no, I'm sure we all have questions. So let me, I'll start with Mr. Emick. We'll go over there.
I'm sorry, Mayor, could I just add a couple of legal comments? Just
Oh, yeah.
for the
Okay,
benefit
that'd be awesome.
of council. So one of the points I want to make is, Mark referenced this a number of times about taxes being used. I've heard this in a number of places. In accordance with Measure F, on its face, taxes cannot be used.
Right.
It's prohibited. So it's not just that we wouldn't need tax revenues. It's that it actually would be illegal for us to use tax revenues, which I think is an important point to make. The second point I would like to make, I understand Mark's optimism on the day one kind of things, but one of the big differences between the town and a private company like Liberty Utilities is that we have to comply with Proposition 218 in rate setting. So one of the first things the town will do, and Mark's numbers will come into this, is perform a rate study, which will assess and determine the rates going forward. So it's not like we could simply just pick and choose rates as we like, but we will do a full analysis at that time upon acquisition, and based on Mark's information, as he said, the rates would be impacted.
So day one would be a 218 process, as much as we go through. Okay.
To reduce rates?
To hope, yeah.
No,
We said, regardless of reduction or Either, yeah, we have to go through a 218 process, and as Mark said, result in a rate reduction. All right, Mr. Emick, did you want to, I'll start with you.
Mark, that
You've
was
got some
great.
good-
I want to thank you for your presentation.
got some good stuff.
I'm going to come at you with what I think the public is thinking right now. You threw a ton of numbers at us, and I think the number one thing is, first of all, we just heard from the attorney, is that taxes aren't allowed, and we'd establish rates by the 218 process. One thing that I've never heard in any of these numbers, but I can see it through the numbers as somebody that isn't as good at numbers as you are. There's no mention here of any water rights or anything. Those come along with the price, is that correct? Because when I see it, when your numbers come from Carlisle to Algonquin, and as they move along, it's a set. They've come up with a rate, and there's no mention of water rights. They are included in the price of the company. Isn't that correct?
Absolutely. The water rights cannot be separated from the water company and sold separately. They have to be sold as part and parcel of the water company. So they cannot be separated from the valuation of the system.
Okay, and several other things have been mentioned besides that. Reserves you had mentioned as far as capital improvements, if we decide to go on there, there's some things that are built into this system. Also, you met debt service reserves. So basically what I'm saying here is based on the debt service and the amount that we're going to save by being in a municipality, we can protect the town in sufficient manner in order to handle whatever the debt service or whatever might come up as far as capital improvements. Let's say there's broken main or something happens. We're going to have the ability to fix all that stuff.
Absolutely. As stated, the sizing of the bond issue included an initial capital reserve. In addition, there are funds that are available. If you look at Liberty's annual report, there's funds that are available within their existing operating expenses that would also be available to the town on day one. Liberty has certain capital improvements, as they've mentioned themselves, that they make annually. Well, those same resources would be available to the town to make those same capital improvements, or that same level of capital improvements on an annual basis.
Okay. And I know you've had years and years of experience doing this. I'm not sure how many years that is, but I respect it. The question was mentioned on the 218 on day one. Can you just refresh our memory real quickly as to how that could affect these numbers on a 218? Is that possible on your numbers? Or you've included that in there, right?
Yes.
If you understand my question?
Yes, absolutely. So the town would perform a rate study prior to setting rates upon acquisition, and that rate study would then determine the level of the rates that would be required to fund the operations of the system, any immediate or any capital improvement needs on an ongoing basis, as well as the acquisition cost. Based on the information that I've provided with the amount of resources available within the current rate, the expectation is that somewhere between $3.5 and $7.5 million, the rates would be reduced by some amount, or could be reduced by some amount that would fall within that range based on what the immediate capital requirements are. Again, much of the system is 60 years old or more.
Right.
So there may be, we need to perform an engineering assessment as we move forward. And based upon that engineering assessment and the determination of the necessity of capital improvements on day one, that would dictate, and the acquisition price, that would dictate the level at which rates could be reduced on day one. But based upon the information that's before us today, it's highly unlikely, and I underscore highly unlikely, that the town would not be able to give a significant reduction in water bills on day one.
Okay. I'm going to lay off my questions. I may come back to you in a few minutes. I'm going to let it go back to my colleagues for more questions. Mr. Mayor?
Okay, I think I'm going to go to Councilwoman Stanton. She has some A lot of notes there, so.
Thank you. One thing, can I get a clarification on what I hear quite often in the community is our citizens, many are concerned about the possibility of a property tax. Can we put that to rest today? I know you've said it, but I want to clarify once more.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, as was referenced by the town attorney, taxes pursuant to the measure that passed last November, property taxes cannot be used to finance the acquisition of the system. We would have to finance it through revenue bonds funded from the ratepayers within the existing service area. So the map that I put up showed the service area of Ranchos, and only those people residing within that service area that are served by Ranchos now, the 19,745 connections that they have, would be the individuals that would be funding the acquisition. But that, again, that acquisition would be paid for within the existing rate.
Right, and I do get it. I just wanted to put it out there one more time. How about water quality? I saw something recently that said there may be water quality risk, which I'd like a clarification from you if you can help us with that.
Well, under the town's environmental impact report that was prepared prior to proceeding with the eminent domain action, we indicated we would continue to run the system in the way Liberty does. So unless there is some sort of health concern with the way Liberty is currently running the system, there'd be no health concern.
And we're mandated. I mean, there's checkpoints every step of the way, but I've heard that quite often, and I wanted to bring that out also, that there's not going to be any added risk that any other company might have. All right, and you've said this over and over and over again, but what I'm reading in mailers I'm getting is somewhat alarming, and it says that some of our citizens might receive an increase of up to $500 a year. And now we've heard tonight that that's not going to happen, but it's alarming to me. And I know we're all hearing these questions, and as we should. It's very concerning for all of us to understand what it will or will not cost us individually or as a town on the whole. But I'll defer to my colleagues. I have plenty of questions, but they do too. So,
Councilmember Kuczak.
Well, you can always get a consultant to come out and pay them to do a review and tell you whatever you really want to hear. John Husing obviously didn't have these numbers that we have today, and so he's touting that it'd cost everybody $500 more a year. But it's just it's whoever's asking the question and giving the right information and everything that's going to give you the right detail. I mean, this is the detail, Mark. You did a great job with this analysis. It really enlightens us on where the price of the water company, you're right in the ballpark. We're just under $100 million, somewhere in there. I mean, looking at Missoula and what's the acquisition costs and stuff are, that we can save the community money on this, and that's the whole goal. The goal for us, the town council, and the reason we've been elected to office is to stabilize rates in this community for the future of our community. We're not talking about just the next couple of years. We're talking about the next 30, 50, 80 years from now to have the ability to keep our water rates compatible or to the other cities. I mean, for growth and for everything we have to do, we have to keep these rates down. All the economic development is dependent on what we can do with our water. We don't want, they talk about how much more each individual is going to pay for their water. Well, look how much money everybody's been paying over the last 10 years. They've been paying well over $500 a year, just been the increases that's gone on from Carlisle from Park to Carlisle to Liberty. And who says that Liberty's not going to sell the company again for another $40 million more, and then there goes our rates again. I mean, it's a private entity. They can do what they want and sell the company. We, as a town, we need the community to back us up, to get because that's what you elected us for, to help stabilize these water rates, to keep our economic development, keep our retiring residents that are here, to keep from spending too much money on their water, and to keep this community safe for years to come. We started this thing with the community effort coming out and asking us to do something about the water rates. They came out in droves, even when the CPUC came out here, and they want to know what we're going to do about it. And this is what we're doing about it, and this is the direction we're going. And if the town is in a Measure F coming out, if the town approves our financing, we'll continue with the acquisition, and that's what we're here for. But your report is great. It shows what we can do. I mean, we got to get the word out to the community. It shows that your town council is looking out for, and your town and the people in the town are looking out for the residents of Apple Valley, and that's the reason I'm on the town council. I have no other reason but to help our community. So that's all I have, Scott. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, can I add one comment? It just furthers on a comment that was just made about the $500 per year that was suggested that it would cost residents in addition to what they're now paying. Based on the information that I've just reviewed with you in terms of the amount of resources that would be immediately available within their existing rate, or there's 11.9 million. Even at the conservative end of that spectrum of $10 million, and again, this is resources available within the existing rate, that $10 million again amounts to 43.1% that each and every customer of Liberty Utilities is now paying above the cost of the water provided to them. That amounts to $506 a year more than the cost of water. So not only do we residents would not have to pay $500 more a year, they're paying $506 more a year right now, right today, and that number is even higher because that's based on 2015 information, and there's been 3 rate increases since that time. So that number is even higher, that residents there would be no additional $500, but there's $506 available to either to pay for the acquisition bonds, reduce rates, and pay for additional capital improvements. And that's very significant.
Well, and I'll just chime in on the significance of that is if you look at our neighboring communities, that rate, it's anywhere from 50 to 75 to 80% difference in cost. So that calculation that you have stands to reason why the other municipalities around us are so much less in water rates. And like I said, anywhere, I think if you look at the county, it's actually closer to 120% less. You know, I think Victorville was the least amount, was about 45% less than us, which calculates to where we're at. Hesperia is, I think, 85% less. But I wanted to clarify one point that Mr. Cusack brought up. The economists that calculated some of these figures that we've seen talked about, floating around, read about, did they contact the town in any way to see where we came up with our analysis on the acquisition costs? I mean, you can throw any figure out and come up with a number if you're not calculating where the revenues are coming from, or if you take a 12% interest, you think we're going to buy it with a credit card or something, you can come up with these outrageous amounts. But I would have thought, and I'm hearing things that they looked at 2011 figures, but they didn't did they by any way contacted the town and make inquiries into the numbers that we have available to us?
No, not at all. Mr. Husing did not contact anyone at the town regarding that report. And there's several what I believe to be factual errors in that report. First and foremost, Barclay Capital, the largest underwriters in the entire country, has provided the analysis in terms of the bond sizing. And we can issue bonds today at between 4 and 4.4%. Again, as I stated earlier, in my experience in 31 years in public finance, I'm not aware of any municipality in the entire country that's needed to issue bonds at 12%.
Where did that number?
That number, just to be clear where that number comes from, it's the maximum interest rate that can be charged under the Revenue Bond Act. It has
okay.
no
No
bearing
bearing
at
on it.
all to this
So it's
issue.
nothing we've said or
No.
came up in any imprint?
It's
I-
simply
I-
the maximum interest rate stated within the Revenue Bond Act.
That's if you're
for
like a
issuance
triple
of revenue
DF
bonds.
But
bond. and-
it did
Oh,
come
did you
from
want-
us
I'm
in
sorry,
a
the
way.
attorney.
Yeah, I
wants to-
just wanted to add to that. Mark's correct, and as a requirement of our measure was to include a maximum. So in Measure F, when it was drafted, it does
they
include
have to-
12% as the stated maximum, but as Mark has demonstrated this evening.
That's by law,
12%
yeah, because we're so, we have to be transparent and upfront, and
And state what the maximum
Yeah,
could
if-
be, so we stated 12%.
the world caves in and we have to use our credit card and our bond rating goes in. All right.
Well, the maximum, that maximum is simply the maximum stated within the Revenue Bond Act, just as the 150 million, again, the reason that that number was suggested is because at $10 million, at the low level of the resources we believe will be available on day one, a 150 bond measure can be financed within that. So that means a 150 million bond measure could be financed with no rate increase whatsoever. And that's why that number was chosen, because it wouldn't require any rate increase whatsoever. There's no 500 additional dollars, as has been stated. There is absolutely no increase that would be required. And at the expected value, valuation of what the system would be required at about $100 million, that debt service would be about $6.5 million. There were a couple of other things that were stated in that Husing report, and I just wanted to speak to those a little bit. And one was relating to the town's assumption of the system and how that would affect our operations. As has been stated many times, all of the field staff would be offered jobs within the town, and the expectation is, and the hope is, that all of the field staff would continue to work for the water company, the water department, and work for the town after that. So we don't expect there would be much change in the operation of the system other than those that are managing it. And as we have discussed it, the system would be assigned under the operational control of our Public Works Director, Greg Snyder, who worked for Western Municipal Water District in Riverside and has as many or more certifications, I'd have to let Greg speak to that, than anyone working at Apple Valley Ranchos now. He is well qualified to run and manage a water system. And in fact, Western Municipal Water District serves 880,000 people compared to Ranchos, which serves 65. It comprises 527 square miles versus the 50 for Ranchos. So we're talking, he has experience working for a system that's 10 times as large as Ranchos, has all the qualifications and certifications required to run the water system, and is more than capable of managing the currently they have 41 employees. We would assume that we would about 35 to 36, 37 of those employees would continue to work for the town upon the town's acquisition, and he's more than capable of managing that number of employees.
And I'm sorry, I'll get to you in a minute, Pro Tem. We're on the same line, and I've talked to a lot of folks in the community, and coming under, and I always emphasize, it's the town or municipal ownership. Doesn't necessarily, and you talked about us managing it, which most systems do, but there are several municipalities that hire a management company to manage the water system for them based on economics. If it's less expensive for us to, which we have been a contract city, we could contract, because I've had people, well, what if the wages and the retirement and all that gets so out of whack with municipalities? We could contract with a private water company. You could have a management system within the town that oversees a private manager. And I know there's even communities within a few miles of us that do that. So not that you have to, but I just wanted to confirm that there's a lot of opportunity and options under municipal ownership. The other point that I wanted to point out, we talked about the world caving in and, 12% and just horrible things happen. We can opt out at the time if it is not feasible for the community to own this at the end of the day, we can end it then. At some level, you have to we're politicians, and we're not going to put something on the community that doesn't benefit the community. That just doesn't make sense. If things do cave in, as I think was mentioned by a speaker earlier today, we don't know, of course. We don't think that, and it's never happened, and there's no history of that, and everything is telling us that we're going in the right direction, and the price and the valuation, as you mentioned, is there, and that's what we have to go on, is realistic numbers. We can't go on hypothetical that the world's going to cave in and things are going to go the wrong way. We have to go by with what history has told us and what our current figures have told us. But in the end of the day, we do have those options to, under our ownership and under council, to end this at some point if we wanted to. And I guess I just wanted to point that out. And I think you would confirm that.
Yes. First and foremost, the town intends to, and we've always underscored the fact that we intend to operate the water system. We have the staff, we have the expertise, we have the ability to operate the water system. We're already billing those same customers. We bill over 22,000 sewer customers. We bill more sewer customers than they bill water customers. We have the ability to bill and collect as well as serve those customers through our Public Works Department and a utility division that would be formed within that department. The comment that was made, and I have the world of respect for the individual, about what if everything went south, was what would the town do if the water revenue were cut in half and we weren't able to service the debt? And it's hard, and my response was, well, that's unrealistic for me to respond to that, because that would assume then that half of the customers would disappear out of the system. And I'm not sure how to answer that question, quite frankly, and that's how I responded to the individual, is that I'm not sure what conditions would result in the sale of water being cut in half, and what would cause that to happen, what calamity might cause that. I know that in the last 3-4 years, as we all do, we've been in a drought. It's a historic drought. It was called a 100-year drought, and our residents have reduced their water consumption to historic levels during that period of time, and we were mandated to reduce their rate of consumption in Apple Valley by 28%, and they did that. So we know what the consumption is based on a 100-year drought, and that's the conditions that we're seeing today. And based upon the conditions that we're seeing today, we know that there's at least $10 million available in resources above the cost of water that can be used to finance the acquisition. And again, the acquisition, just in the taxes of $4 million and the profit reported out in 2015 of $4.3 million, that's $8.3 million. $8.3 million in taxes and profit would fund acquisition bonds at $130 million. $8.3 million funds a $130 million bond issue. So again, the notion that we cannot fund the acquisition within the existing rate, have additional funds available to do additional capital improvements or reduce rates, I just don't see how anyone can make that statement, because it's very clear within the information that Liberty reports out. These aren't our numbers, these are their numbers. These are their numbers that they've reported out to the CPUC. And I guess the one thing perhaps maybe they want to suggest that is that these are unaudited numbers, because Liberty has never issued an audited financial statement in their history. The only annual report that we have to base this information on is their one annual report to the CPUC, and based upon their self-reported numbers, there's at least $10 million that they're charging above the cost of water.
Can move on to Councilman, or Mayor Pro Tem Bishop. I know you've
Well,
been
thank you
waiting
so
to
much, because I've got
debate.
all these notes and
Hey,
you
after
wiped out all
asking
my
questions,
questions.
He's writing more notes down.
My first question was about the audit. There's been a lot of things talked about transparency. This document and the audit that is late, that Liberty is late and seems to be late getting in to the California Public Utility Commission. The town audits all of our books. The town audit records are all public, and there's full transparency on everything the town does. That is not what I'm holding in my hand. Even though this is a California public utility, that's not what's occurring. And that's one of the reasons why over 80% of the municipalities in the state of California control the water. This is a public utility. It should be audited, and the records should be available to the people of the community to see what's going on. The second item I wanted to bring up real quick, and Richard, believe me when I tell you, you're not getting picked on. But if things cave in, if things go south, if we have a natural disaster, if we have a man-made disaster, or if we have an worldwide economic disaster, which could be more to the point, I pray to God that Apple Valley is in control of its own water and its own future, because we're going to be the ones here that are going to be relying on water, not some foreign entity. So I appreciate your comments, but those are just my own beliefs. The third item I wanted to bring up was about the revenue bonds. I want to we've all made this so clear, but for the people in Spring Valley Lake Equestrian CSA 64, even though they're being told in their mailboxes, I think 4 times in the last 2 weeks, that you're going to be paying for this, they are not paying for it. The people of Golden State who are in their mailboxes every day getting, you're going to pay for this, are not going to pay for this. These are revenue bonds being paid for by the customers, 19,747 of them, of Apple Valley Ranchos or Liberty Water or Algonquin Water, whatever they want to call themselves. And I think that's a key thing that our residents need to know. And also, we have a lot of people in Apple Valley that have private wells. They're also getting these notices and going, why in the world, if I'm on a private well, am I getting increases? I want to talk a little bit about the taxes. The government does not, nor should it pay itself taxes. That makes absolutely no sense. Our school district doesn't pay taxes on their property. Our fire district doesn't pay property taxes. Our town doesn't pay property taxes. The Mojave Water Agency doesn't pay property taxes. If this is truly a public utility, then I think that that money that are being paid in the taxes should be able to go back to the people. And I think that's a critical point in the fact this is a public utility. It should serve the public. One of the last points, and I'm going to go on out here, is that I do want to thank you. You have obviously done a tremendous amount of work, and I truly hope that the people of Apple Valley, even though this is a tremendous amount to digest, there's nothing easy about looking at all these numbers, looking at the bond rating, looking at all the different things that people have to make a decision, and yet their mailboxes, their TVs. I think recently either Algonquin Water or Liberty Water put something like $300,000 a couple of days ago into financing advertising through their public relations firms to send out messages to the people of Apple Valley that on a no vote that I just can't believe my mailbox every day has a different item. But I think the thing that I want to do before I make a suggestion is that, to me, for us, for the town of Apple Valley, this seems to me to be a David and Goliath issue. And I want to remind everybody that David stood out there against Goliath, and he gave it everything he had, and he tried everything he did, and ultimately David won. And that's sometimes this community is not going to be able to put $300,000, $400,000, $1 million into public relations. It's not going to happen. But we're going to try the best we can to make sure the citizens of our community understand what's going on. And then I'm going to reach out. We have been telling the citizens of our community for probably 4 years now, comparing what Victorville, Hesperia, CSA 64, which is Spring Valley Lake in San Bernardino County, other areas and how much more we've been paying for it. I think it's absolutely time, and if we have to go through a nexus study and a 218 process, I understand that. That's part of the transparency. That's part of the California state law under Proposition 218. We need to be looking at reducing rates for everybody that is served by Liberty Water currently, when and if we're able to move forward with the court action by a minimum of 10 to 15%. And that is something with this town council and me as personally, in my opinion, when we're able to do this, we need to do that one of the first things we can. And we need to do it by the law. We need to do it by 218 because we are a transparent community. We are abiding by the government codes. We're not a foreign entity, and we're not just doing what we think we want to do. So those are my questions and my comments, and
Okay.
now I get to turn it over to you.
And I know there might be some more, and I'll ask for more questions from the council, but I wanted to touch on an issue that's near and dear to me, which is, that from day one, when I ran for council some 15 years ago, was economic development. And it was, and Matthew talked about it earlier today, and keep reminding people it's economic development that pays for the services in this community. And I think, and I believe that, and I've talked to large users, I've talked to businesses, just because of the circles I travel in, talked to a lot of folks. I talked to even renters that talk to their landlords and saying that there's an issue with, water usage and water rates in Apple Valley. And you got to remember when you're, in a house, you're not using a lot, and you're staying tier one, you're in that, $100, like they said, $100 a month. I think, that's probably equitable. But when you get into, like I say, you drink your glass of water, you turn on a faucet. I talked to someone who owns a beauty salon that his landlord came to him and said, I negotiated a rate with him based on square footage, based on what he does with his other tenants, and he said he's going broke because he has to pay, the landlord is paying for the water rates, and he's trying to negotiate a new contract, even though this guy has a lease for 5 years. And so the guy that was renting was talking to me about it. I said, well, it's up to you and your landlord, but I understand what you're talking about. I personally, and my question to you has to do with standby fees, and this is where some of the businesses and a lot of renters don't understand that, of course, it's built into their rent. I'm an owner-operator, so I get to pay the fee. My fee's $100 a month. It's $1,200 a year for standby fees, not just for small 4,000 square foot warehouse. I can imagine at a distribution center. I can imagine and we go to ICSC every year, and we talk to hotel operators because we're desperately in need of a hotel in Apple Valley. And they tell me the numbers just don't crunch. And part of the numbers that they look at, if you think about water usage for a hotel, sprinklers, standby fees, they're doing their laundry, they've got showers, I'm sure is a tremendous. And so when you're looking at maybe that part of it, numbers a few dollars in a hotel room where people will make the choice to stay somewhere else, and there may be that is a factor in Apple Valley on economic development. And so I know, and we have housing that's built now that's required. Single-family residents now require sprinkler systems, and they're, from what I understand, are getting a standby fee, and they're asking us about those issues on a municipality. And as I understand that, and I'm only going from personal reference, I have, store locations in Asperia, don't pay a standby fee. In Victorville, it's a very nominal, it's like $8 a month or something like that. And as I understand, when we talk about nexus studies and 218s, municipalities can't charge for something they can't make money for a service they're not providing. And everybody asks me, well, what is a standby? It's just in case you need water, I pay $1,200 a year. So can you, and I'm going to assume that standby fees would somehow be mitigated and then incorporated in the rates. How have you calculated that in, or looked at that, or processed that in the analysis that you're doing now? Because I don't know how that would be factored in. It's obviously more towards business and economic development, but as we move forward and housing starts to come up, every house is going to have sprinklers.
Mr. Mayor, one of the shortcomings that we've had throughout this process is the lack of information available to us. from Liberty Utilities. While the town has responded to almost 300 public record requests and other document production requests, we haven't received that same level of disclosure from Liberty. So we don't have all of the information about their system. We can only base it upon what information is readily available. And there is quite a bit of information that's readily available. But one of the things that we would seek to do initially, again, as was mentioned by the town attorney, is we would conduct a rate study. And through that rate study, our goal would be to eliminate the standby charges or reduce them to such a nominal amount that would be more comparable to Victorville. But our first goal would be to eliminate the standby fees. Absent all of the information from Liberty, we can't today say that they'd be completely eliminated, but we'd expect that they would be significantly reduced, if not eliminated.
Yeah,
And that would
depending
be-
on whether
that would be-
services, yeah.
Correct, and that would be determined through the conduct of the rate study. But our goal would be to completely eliminate the standby fee, have one rate that we would charge for all customers that they would pay based upon the amount of water that they use.
Might be a different rate for commercial versus, okay, because I don't know that it,
Be a different rate based
I
on the
don't know that
size
it
of the
costs any
service
more to
the-
have,
to the facility.
you know, I know it costs a resident, you know, there's, well, you know more about
Well, I just gonna mention to you
systems
that-
and sprinkler systems than I do.
Well, the
so-
residents at Jess Ranch pay a monthly, their monthly standby fee for if they wash their car. So there's a fee that they're actually paying Liberty in case they wash the retired people at Jess Ranch, in case they wash their car, there's a special standby fee that they're paying, each one of the residents in Jess Ranch.
Okay. All right, thank you, Mark. And now I'm going to ask the council if there's any more further questions or. That's a great report. Yeah, there's, and I appreciate getting those numbers out, and these are available to the public anytime.
Absolutely.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Remy.
One quick question. CPUC gets funded on these bills too through the water company, isn't that correct?
That's correct.
And how much is that figured in? That's not a very big fee, but that is also going to be eliminated, or do we have to, we don't pay
It'd
that?
be eliminated, but off the top of my head, perhaps the town attorney knows the number. I don't know the exact number that this
It's
is.
somewhere between 1% and 2% on every bill. It was recently increased in January of this year by, I think it was roughly 20% increase in that, but it's still in a range of between 1% and 2% on every bill,
So-
which is the CPUC fee.
So we're paying 1% to 2% to appointed individuals by the governor of the state of California to be in charge of our rates, is that correct?
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Please answer that.
That's absolutely ridiculous, thank you.
Well, I had one time I calculated it all out, and I didn't write, I had the figures all, and I figured out the percentage of rates times the number of users, and it was several thousands of dollars a month that they pay, and you add that up on a annual basis, it was like 250, I don't know, it was a lot. It was a lot of money when you start adding it up. But yeah, you're right, that would be eliminated as well.
Yes, I wanted to
Not
point
that it
that
would
out.
be a huge amount, but it's something that you're paying somebody, you wouldn't be paying the council to
Didn't they just ask for a 1% increase?
the
The
PUC. or-
CPUC, no, I'm just talking about a rate base issues that are going on right now. I mean, 1% or 2%, it could be quite a bit.
Well, it's 1% is,
Exactly.
yeah, it's 250,000 a year. Okay, thank you. If there's no other questions, I think it's a receive and file on this. Appreciate the input, appreciate the work you did for us on that.
Thank you very
I'm
much.
glad we can get the information out to the community.
Good job, Mark.